In March 1975, Sylvester Stallone had approximately $106 in his bank account. He had recently sold his dog, a bull mastiff named Butkus, his closest companion across 3 years of professional rejection in New York, to a stranger outside a liquor store for $40. Because he could not afford to feed both of them and had decided the dog deserved better than what he could currently offer. He had appeared 2 years earlier in a low-budget adult film called The Italian Stallion for $200 because $200 had been the difference between eating and not eating. He had, at various points across his early career, slept in the Port Authority bus terminal because sleeping there was free. He was 28 years old. In that same month, he watched a closed-circuit broadcast of Muhammad Ali fighting Chuck Wepner, a club fighter from New Jersey who had no business lasting more than 3 rounds with the greatest boxer alive and who lasted 15. 3 days later, he handed producers a screenplay. They offered him $360,000 for the rights. He said no. He said if he was not playing the lead, there was no deal. And then he waited to find out what it was going to cost him to hold that position. The Sylvester Stallone story is usually told as a story of perseverance. The struggling actor who refused to give up, who wrote himself into a movie, who proved the industry wrong. That version is accurate about the events and organized in the specific way that perseverance narratives are organized to produce admiration for the outcome rather than examination of the mechanism. The mechanism is more interesting than the outcome. The mechanism is a person with $106 in his bank account and no professional leverage of any kind, who had been rejected from every serious acting role he had auditioned for across years of trying, looked at a $360,000 offer for his screenplay and calculated correctly that accepting it on those terms would produce a worse outcome than refusing it. That calculation made in the specific financial and professional circumstances in which it was made is the most important creative decision Sylvester Stallone ever made. This video is about how he arrived at the calculation and what the calculation cost him to hold and what it built. There are 3 things about Sylvester Stallone's path to Rocky that the perseverance narrative has organized around not examining. The first is what the $360,000 actually represented. Not just a salary offer, but a choice between 2 outcomes. One of which would have produced a comfortable life and none of the films that followed, and one of which produced everything that followed at the cost of everything that was not yet there. The second is the dog. Butkus sold for $40 when Stallone could not afford to feed him, bought back for $15,000 the day after Rocky succeeded, is the specific detail that the perseverance narrative most consistently reproduces and least consistently examines. The dog is not a detail about how hard things were. The dog is the evidence of what he was actually willing to sacrifice to hold the position. And the third thing is the deal he eventually accepted. Because the deal he accepted, a budget of $1,100,000, a 28-day shooting schedule, and a salary that various accounts place at $23,000, is the deal of a person who understood that the terms mattered less than the result. He did not get rich from Rocky. He got the film, and the film was the thing. Sylvester Enzio Stallone was born on July 6, 1946 in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York City to Frank Stallone Sr. and Jacqueline Laberfish, known as Jackie. The birth was complicated. Forceps were used during the delivery in ways that damaged nerves in the lower left side of his face, producing the partial paralysis of his lip and the distinctive speech pattern, the slight slur, the specific quality of his verbal delivery that the industry would spend years treating as a liability, and that eventually became one of the most recognizable vocal signatures in cinema. His parents' marriage was volatile and eventually ended when he was around 11 years old. He was sent to a series of boarding schools across Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. At various points, characterized by the school's administrators as educationally challenged in terms that did not take adequate account of a child who was navigating a broken family, a series of institutional environments, and the specific difficulties of being a large and physically unusual boy in institutions not designed for people who do not fit the expected mold. He was not considered academically promising. The assessments were made by people looking at what was visible. What was not visible in those assessments was a specific quality of physical determination that the institution's environments were producing in a person for whom the formal channels of recognition were consistently closed. He attended the American College of Switzerland on an athletic scholarship of sorts, where he studied drama with the specific seriousness that people who have come to a subject late and without the conventional preparation bring to it. Not the seriousness of someone who has always been told they are talented, but the seriousness of someone who has decided that this is the thing and who is going to master it regardless of what the surrounding environment does or does not provide. He transferred to the University of Miami, where he continued studying drama. He moved to New York after graduating with a specific combination of ambition and delusion that young performers require to sustain the years of rejection that professional acting produces in almost everyone before. It produces anything else. He auditioned, he was rejected. He auditioned again. He was rejected again. The specific quality of the rejections was not simply that he was told no. Everyone auditioning in New York was told no most of the time, but that he was told no in terms that communicated something more specific, that his appearance, his speech, his physical presentation did not fit the categories that the industry was organized around filling. He did not fit. The industry was not organized to accommodate people who did not fit. The specific low point in his pre-Rocky career is the kind of detail that biographical accounts of successful people include, because it is so extreme that it makes the subsequent success more dramatic and is simultaneously the kind of detail that, examined carefully, reveals something specific about the person rather than just the circumstances. He appeared in a low-budget adult film called Party at Kitty and Studs, later renamed The Italian Stallion after Rocky's success, in early 1970 for a fee of $200. He has discussed this decision in interviews across the decades with a directness that does not attempt to minimize what it was. He needed the $200 more than he was able to afford, the consequences of not taking the opportunity. The calculation is the important thing. He was not making a creative choice. He was making a financial choice in the specific circumstances of someone for whom the financial choice and the professional choice had diverged in ways that the $200 temporarily resolved. The alternative was not dignity preserved through poverty. It was poverty without the $200. He took the $200. He kept auditioning. He kept being rejected. He kept showing up for what the industry was consistently telling him it was not interested in providing. The Chuck Wepner fight happened on March 24th, 1975. Muhammad Ali was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Chuck Wepner was a club fighter from Bayonne, New Jersey, known professionally as the Bayonne Bleeder, for his tendency to absorb punishment with a quantity of blood that referees and opponents found alarming, and that he himself treated as an occupational condition rather than a crisis. Nobody expected Wepner to survive the early rounds. Nobody expected him to knock Ali down in the 9th, which he did, legally or illegally, depending on whose account of the footwork you believe, or to still be upright and fighting in the 15th round before the referee stopped the contest with 19 seconds remaining. Sylvester Stallone watched the fight and saw something in it that the sports coverage did not organize itself to see. Not a boxing match, but a story about a specific kind of human possibility. The possibility that a person without talent commensurate to the challenge facing them might, through a specific quality of will and refusal, force the challenge to take them seriously. He had been living that possibility for 8 years of professional rejection. He went home after the fight 3 days later. The specific time frame varies across accounts, with some placing it at 3.5 days, some at a week, but all agreeing that the script was written in an extraordinarily compressed period. He had a finished screenplay, but the screenplay is not the most important thing about what happened in March 1975. The screenplay was the means. The decision he made when the producers told him how much they were willing to pay for it, that decision is the thing, because the decision was not made by someone with options. It was made by someone with $106 in his bank account, no professional leverage of any kind, and a dog he had already sold because he could not afford to keep him. The decision was made in those specific circumstances, and here is what it actually required him to hold on to. Producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff read the Rocky screenplay and wanted it. The specific quality of the material, the underdog fighter, the love story, the specificity of the Philadelphia setting, the quality of the dialogue was apparent enough that the producers were prepared to pay well for it. The number that has been most consistently associated with the initial offer is in the vicinity of $360,000 for the rights without Stallone attached as a star. The number was real. For a person with $106 in his bank account, the number was extraordinary. Not lottery-winning extraordinary, but life-changing in every practical sense. He could pay rent, he could eat, he could buy his dog back. He could stop auditioning and write, which was something he was good at and which had just produced evidence that other people recognized he was good at. The case for taking the money was overwhelming. He said no. He said he was Rocky Balboa. The producers told him that United Artists, which would distribute the film, wanted a bankable star. Ryan O'Neal, James Caan, Burt Reynolds, Robert Redford, someone whose name on the marquee would deliver a guaranteed opening weekend that an unknown actor with a partially paralyzed face and a specific speech pattern could not deliver. Stallone said he was Rocky Balboa. That was the negotiation. United Artists eventually agreed. The terms they agreed to were not the terms the studio agrees to. When it is confident in what it is doing, the budget was $1,100,000, a figure that constrained the production so severely that the production became, in retrospect, one of the best arguments in cinema history for what creative constraint produces in people who respond to constraint by solving problems rather than abandoning them. The shooting schedule was 28 days. Stallone's salary was $23,000, or a comparable figure that the various accounts produce consistently in that neighborhood. A figure that is, for a person who had recently sold his dog for $40, a life-changing amount, and that is, by the standards of what the film would eventually generate, essentially nothing. He was not getting rich from Rocky. He was getting Rocky. The distinction mattered. He knew it mattered. He had done the calculation. The production of Rocky is documented extensively in accounts from everyone who was present for it, and the accounts agree on the specific quality of what those 28 days produced. A film made by people who understood, from the director John Avildsen down through the crew and the cast, that they were making something real and that the budget's constraints were not obstacles to the realness, but conditions that the realness required. The fight sequences were filmed in part with real spectators who had been bused to Philadelphia for the occasion and who were responding to an actual boxing match rather than a staged one. Because real response is what the budget allowed, and because real response is what the material needed, the final sequence, Rocky climbing the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the specific quality of physical exhaustion and triumph that the image captures, was filmed at the end of a long shooting day with a Stallone who had been awake and working for many hours and whose physical state is visible in the footage in a way that the studio's preferred conditions would never have permitted. The production's constraints produced the film's reality. The film's reality is what the audience in November 1976 responded to. Rocky was released on November 21st, 1976. It grossed $225 million worldwide on a budget of $1,100,000. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences nominated it for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Sylvester Stallone, and Best Original Screenplay for Sylvester Stallone, making him only the third person in Academy history, after Orson Welles and Charles Chaplin, to be nominated in both acting and writing categories in the same year. It won 3, Best Picture, Best Director for John Avildsen, and Best Film Editing. Stallone did not win Best Actor or Best Screenplay. He sat in the audience at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles on March 29, 1977, and watched Rocky win Best Picture, having turned down $360,000 22 months earlier in order to be in the room. Here is what he did the morning after. The morning after Rocky's commercial success became undeniable, the specific morning that the opening weekend numbers confirmed that the gamble had produced the outcome, Sylvester Stallone went back to the liquor store where he had sold his dog. He had sold Butkus to a stranger for $40. He did not know who the stranger was. He stood outside the store and waited, by various accounts, for 2 days, until the man who had bought Butkus came by again. He offered to buy the dog back. The man, who had in the interim acquired a puppy that Butkus had fathered, declined to sell for less than $15,000. Stallone paid the $15,000 for Butkus and the puppy. The specific detail, the $40 paid in desperation, the $15,000 paid in consequence, the 2 days spent waiting outside a liquor store for a man whose name he didn't know, is the detail the Perseverance narrative reproduces most often, because it is the most dramatic. It is also the most precisely accurate description of what the $360,000 refusal had actually cost. Not the money it had failed to produce, but the dog. He paid $15,000 for the dog he had sold for $40, because the $40 was all he had, and the $15,000 was the consequence of having made the right decision when the right decision was available only to someone with nothing left to protect. The franchise that Rocky produced, 6 films over 30 years, culminating in Rocky Balboa in 2006, followed by 3 Creed films through 2023 in which he appeared as a trainer, Rocky Balboa, guiding the next generation, is one of the most commercially durable in the history of American cinema. Sylvester Stallone's net worth is estimated at approximately $400 million. He has written and directed multiple projects. He has produced television series, including Tulsa King, in which he plays an aging mob boss, adjusting to a new environment in ways that the character's specific qualities make legible as an older version of the same essential story Rocky told in 1976. A person placed in circumstances not designed for them, finding, through a specific quality of refusal to accept those circumstances' limitations, a way to make something the circumstances themselves would not have predicted. The specific quality has been consistent across 5 decades of work. It was present at the Wepner fight in March 1975. It produced the decision to refuse $360,000 when the calculation said the money was less valuable than the outcome. He did the calculation with $106 in his bank account. The calculation was correct. The specific circumstances of his childhood produced in Sylvester Stallone a quality that the biographical accounts of his career treat as background, and that is in fact the foundation of everything that came after. His mother, Jacqueline Stallone, known as Jackie, was a woman of considerable force of personality and considerable commercial instinct. She ran a women's gym, published a book on women's fitness, appeared on television as an astrologer, and was described by virtually everyone who knew her as a person who understood intuitively the relationship between public attention and commercial opportunity. The specific quality of his mother's orientation toward the world, the understanding that attention was a resource and that the people who knew how to generate and use it had an advantage over the people who did not, was the most useful thing he absorbed from his childhood environment. He absorbed it in the way that children absorb their parents' most fundamental orientation. not as a theory but as an assumption about how things work, which is the form of learning most difficult to unlearn and that most thoroughly shapes what comes after. The 2 years immediately preceding the Rocky script, the period between the Lords of Flatbush in 1974 and the Wetner fight in March 1975, were the period the perseverance narrative covers most quickly because they do not fit its organizing logic. He had not given up. He had not arrived at some breakthrough insight. He was continuing to audition, continuing to be rejected, continuing to live in the specific circumstances that $106 bank balance represents. Not destitution in the absolute sense, but the specific combination of financial pressure and professional rejection that tests. Over years of sustained exposure, whether the ambition was durable or situational. He had appeared in Woody Allen's Bananas in 1971 in a brief, uncredited role as a subway thug. He had appeared in The Lords of Flatbush in 1974, which gave him his first significant screen time and demonstrated to the people who saw it that he was capable of carrying dramatic material with a specific physical authority that the camera responded to. He had also been writing. The screenplay he finished in 3 days in March 1975 was not written by someone who had never written a screenplay. It was written by someone who had been developing the capacity to write that specific screenplay for years. The shooting of Rocky is documented in enough detail to make clear that the production's constraints were not simply obstacles overcome by determination, but conditions that produced specific creative decisions a more comfortable production would not have made. The famous training montage, Rocky running through the Italian market in South Philadelphia at dawn, culminating in the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, was filmed with real vendors and real pedestrians who had not been cleared for a film shoot because clearing them would have required time and permits that the 28-day schedule did not accommodate. The audience watching Rocky run through the market is watching real people encountering an actual runner in the pre-dawn hours of a real Philadelphia morning. The specific quality of reality this produces, the authenticity of the environment, the unrehearsed quality of the bystanders' responses, is the quality that the music and the editing and the performance combine with to produce one of the most emotionally effective sequences in the history of sports cinema. The production did not have the budget for a controlled environment. The controlled environment would not have produced the film. The Academy Award nominations he received for Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay in 1977 placed him in historical company that the evening's outcome obscured. Only Orson Welles, nominated for Citizen Kane in 1942, and Charles Chaplin had previously received acting and writing nominations for the same film. He did not win either category. Best Actor went to Peter Finch for Network. Best Original Screenplay went to Paddy Chayefsky, also for Network. Rocky won Best Picture. He accepted the award as a producer alongside Robert Chartoff and Irwin Winkler. The specific experience of winning Best Picture while losing Best Actor and Best Screenplay, being recognized for the film while not being recognized for the performance or the writing that made the film, is an experience the Perseverance narrative does not organize itself to examine, but that shaped his subsequent career in ways that are visible in the films he made afterward. The Rambo series, the subsequent Rocky films, the choices about what stories to tell and how to tell them, they reflect a person who understood from that Oscar night that the industry's recognition of his value and his actual value were not the same thing, and who spent the following decades working in the space between those two assessments. The decades of the Rocky and Rambo franchises, the sequels, the commercial machinery built around his specific physical presence and his cultural identity as the embodiment of a certain American mythology of toughness, produced commercial results that the initial $360 option did not predict, and that the $23,000 salary certainly did not anticipate. They also produced a creative record that the industry assessed with the specific ambivalence it reserves for performers who are commercially significant but who operate in genres that the critical establishment does not fully validate. He pursued dramatic roles when they became available. His performance in Copland in 1997, which required him to gain weight and to perform in a register that the franchise years had not demanded, was an attempt, largely successful, to demonstrate the dramatic range that those years had prevented from being visible. The industry acknowledged the attempt. It then continued to offer franchise sequels. The commercial logic is not complicated. It is the same logic that had told him in 1975 that he was not a bankable star. The franchise success validated him commercially. The dramatic range he actually possessed remained, for most of his career, commercially underdeployed. The Creed films, 3 films, 2015 through 2023, in which he plays Rocky Balboa as an aging trainer guiding the son of his former rival Apollo Creed, are the clearest available demonstration of what he understood about the material he had created in 1975. The specific quality of what Rocky Balboa represents in the Creed films. Not the protagonist, but the weight-bearing wall, the character whose accumulated history makes the new protagonist's story legible, required from him a performance in a register that the original Rocky films had not asked for, the register of a person carrying significant loss with dignity, rather than fighting through it with determination. He understood the register. He had been living in the material long enough to understand what the character would be in his 70s. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for Creed in 2016. He did not win. The nominations in 2016 and in 1977 bracket a career that the industry has consistently recognized in the moment of maximum commercial visibility and consistently failed to fully account for in the record. The record is there, the film is there. Rocky is on the American Film Institute's list of the 100 greatest films. The person who wrote it and starred in it for $23,000 is worth $400 million. The calculation was correct. Sylvester Stallone is in his late 70s. He continues to act and produce and continues to occupy a place in the cultural conversation about American cinema that the $360,000 decision in 1975 made possible, and that every subsequent decision has sustained. Rocky Balboa is listed by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 greatest American films. The specific quality of what makes it great, the humanity of the material, the reality of the performance, the specific dignity of a story about a person who does not win but does not quit, is the quality that the budget constraints produced and that the decision to hold out for the starring role made available. He could not have played Rocky if he had sold the script. The specific connection between the script and the person playing it, the specific quality of lived experience that the material required and that the performer had, is the connection that the $360,000 decision preserved. United Artists wanted Robert Redford. Rocky needed Sylvester Stallone. He knew it. He held the position. The dog came back. Subscribe with the calculation. The specific logic of refusing a number that most people would not be able to refuse in the specific circumstances that made refusing it the correct decision is the version of his story worth hearing, because this channel examines the decisions behind the outcomes, and the decisions are always more interesting than the outcomes they produce. Click the screen now. Subscribe now.